I would say all of my best hires had very little experience in the wedding world at all before they started working for me. And it was really more about, do they have the general type of skill set, and do they have the personality that I need on my team and the type of work ethic and work quality that I need? If you're a venue looking for new people, or a small business in general, is to just be aware of how specific you're getting in that job listing. Of course, if you're a venue and you're trying to hire a director of catering, you do need them to have more background and experience.
We document and share best practices around owning, operating, and managing world-class wedding venues.
Caitlin, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Jonathan. I'm looking forward to chatting with you.
I'm excited about this too. Like we were saying just before we got on, we've rescheduled this a couple of times. And so I'm definitely really excited to chat with you and hear more about Fulton Events and kind of understand a little bit more about your journey in our industry. And so, yeah, could you give us and really kind of start us off with your origin story in this industry, how you got started?
Yeah, of course. So I graduated from college in 2010, did not have a background in wedding planning at all, but literally stereotypical like girl in high school who was on the prom committee and, part of my class secretary, and always was planning events and doing things throughout high school and into college. I was on my college field hockey team and was the social chair and always planning all of the events and gatherings. So I always definitely had that nature, but obviously certain, universities offer, degrees or backgrounds in event planning, but mine did not. So I just came out of college and always just had this idea that events was maybe a world I wanted to be in, but I studied more marketing, communications, leadership, journalism, that sort of background. And shortly after graduation, I started looking into, how do you become an event planner? How does this work? What kind of education do you need? So shortly after graduating with my undergrad, I actually did a wedding planning certificate program at Temple University in Philadelphia, which was, nothing fancy. It was just a certificate. But at the time, back in 2010, if you can imagine, there were actually not a lot of online courses and there was not a lot of things like that. So a lot of other planners in the Philadelphia market who I would reach out to would say, oh, do this program to kind of get your feet wet and meet some people and understand how it all works. So I did that program, and shortly thereafter started interning and working with other planners in my Philadelphia market. So I had a full-time job in marketing and communications, but was, doing the side hustle on the weekend and after work and working weddings. And that's always something I tell young professionals is, having a job is great, but those who I know that get ahead much further than their peers are doing these other things on the side. And it's really more important what you're doing after work, what you're doing on the weekends with your time, that's really going to push your career further. So that's what I was doing. I was spending my nights and weekends working for other wedding planners and working wedding days and just ready to get my feet wet. So I worked with another planner in my market for 4 years before launching my own company 8 years ago in 2015. So we launched my first business, which was under actually a different brand name called Clover Event Co. Launched that in 2015 and just started working my own weddings. So I already had some connections from the industry previously. I had been running my own weddings under the other company I worked for 4 years. But I was still young. I was 25, right? I had these connections, but I, of course, didn't jump into planning luxury weddings. I was in, a middle market like Philadelphia at the time. I was fairly young. So I really kind of started from the ground up and started doing, day of coordination and partial planning and starting to do full service. But I would say for budgets that were, kind of more in that $60,000 to $80,000 range, is like nice, lovely weddings, nothing, too over the top. But really started building my team and looking at where I wanted to go. And so over the last, 8 years with my original brand, Clover, we sort of built up to be now what is more of, a high-end luxury planner and a top planner in the Philadelphia market. And now we're kind of hitting that cusp of, okay, we've done all these amazing things in Philadelphia and we love our local market. We're really big supporters of everyone there. And we really put a lot of effort and time into building our market, but I'm also doing more work outside of the Philadelphia market now. And that all came with a recent rebrand that we did this year, which was switching our name from Clover Event Co. to Fulton Events, and just really getting away from being what we once were, which was really known as a Philadelphia planner, to being more known as a regional and national planner, and really working with more luxury clientele. So most of our clients, are obviously more in the 6-figure budget range, and we exclusively now offer full service planning, and I have a full-time team that helps me make that all happen. So that's kind of our trajectory from now till here.
Wow, that was a lot. I can't wait to unpack pieces of that. That's incredible though. I want to go back really quick and talk about something you said in the beginning. When you first were interested in planning, event planning, and you kind of knew that you had that, itch that you needed to scratch, and it was something that you were passionate about. Obviously, you went to school for marketing and journalism and some of those different things. Ironically, skills that, probably serve you now, right?
They'll serve me very well, yeah.
But I guess my question is for someone listening to this right now who maybe they work for a venue, or maybe they're just in the industry, they're listening to this podcast to get a little bit of understanding about the industry. Does someone need to go to college or need to go to a certificate program to get involved in the wedding industry, either as a planner or any other position?
Sure, absolutely good question. Definitely not. It's obviously not a requirement. I think what helped with me in doing that was because my background was, I had been planning these events throughout college and things like that, but had no formal training. I will say sometimes certificate programs like the one that I did do give you a little bit more of like specific training on things and introductory to certain words and lingo and language and also just the opportunity to meet different professionals. So there obviously are a lot of online programs, but there still are quite a few in-person programs. My program was taught by other planners in the market. So not only did it give me some training, but it also introduced me to people in the market rather quickly, versus if I had just done like cold calling or emails and tried to get connected with people. So I do think it's a really good place to start if someone says, I want to be in this market or in this industry and I don't have any connections. It's definitely a really good place to start. I've had other friends that obviously went to college and had, hotel restaurant management degrees, which is definitely something that typically kind of lends you working into obviously the restaurant or wedding specific world, catering direction. I would say those are really good degrees if you're really thinking you're going to go more like venue and catering direction. But if you're trying to be, planner, photographer, florist, any of those things, then obviously you don't have to have any specific degree. And most of my friends that are in this industry, a lot of us actually worked in corporate for several years first before jumping back into the wedding world. And sometimes even that experience is really good because it's given us the business acumen and the HR background and just that little bit of corporate feel that obviously we don't fully bring into our small businesses, but having that background gives us that business acumen to be able to run our businesses successfully, because that is a big thing in this industry too. You can be an amazing creative, but if you can't run a business, you're not going to be able to survive.
I love that. And I love how you differentiated the two. It definitely seems like there's two sides of the brain almost, right? There's the creative side that's designing these incredible events, but then there's also that really savvy business side that oftentimes is, more math-based, right? More analytical, because you're trying to understand, okay, what strategic decisions do I need to make for my company to grow, in the market, or even like you did, maybe even changing the types of clients that you served. Because it sounds like, you went through that process. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously we love all of our clients, but when you start out, you're starting with working with a certain type of client, a certain type of budget, and your goal, of course, is to hopefully grow that to hit the clientele that you want. And so understanding kind of how that works and pricing models and your revenue and knowing your books and your numbers is huge. And I do obviously meet far too many small businesses that don't know their numbers. And that became even more clear in times during, COVID, when we had to apply for PPP and different things, and companies would say, I don't really have my books together. I don't really know my numbers. And that was shocking to me, how many friends of mine didn't have that information handy and didn't know their numbers and didn't know that information. And it's so important, because if you're going to try to grow a business and have it sustain itself long term, that is the most important piece you can have, is having your business really tight, having your numbers really tight to be able to understand that. So it's very important.
And Caitlin, I know we said we were going to talk about, some of the team stuff and some of the networking, which we're certainly going to get to, but I'm curious, as we're getting there, I'm curious about how the number side of things play in, kind of the yin to the yang of the people side. And so when you think about the important numbers, when you think about the important numbers that you're looking at in your business to understand whether you're moving the needle forward or not, what sorts of things are you tracking?
Yeah, of course. So obviously, being able to have like a really good profit loss statement and understanding, your top line revenue is obviously important, but that's not even the most important number. You can be a $2 million business, but what's most important is your net profit and your profit margin. So, you can also be a $300,000 revenue business and be making more net profit than somebody who's a $2 million revenue business. So I think that's always a misconception too, is sometimes people want to hit these benchmarks of where they're at with revenue. And that can feel really exciting to all of a sudden hit, 100, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then hit that $1 million mark. It's a really, really amazing feeling, but it's not the barometer of success always, right? So the more important numbers are obviously your net income, which is going to be obviously, take away all your expenses, all your staffing. What is that net income? But more importantly, also what your profit loss margin is. And those numbers will really help you figure out what employees and team members you can bring on at what rates and how much additional revenue you need to bring in to be able to cover those salaries. So those numbers are the most helpful in figuring this out, where we work really closely with our bookkeeping and accounting team to literally be able to tell us, with your current numbers, if you want to bring on an additional staff member in this role and you think that role should be making about this much salary, here's exactly how much more revenue you need to bring in to be able to pay that person that much to have nothing else change. If you want to bring on that person and that means more work, so they need to make money and you need to also make more money for taking on more work, then here's the amount of extra revenue you need to bring in. So when you have your books really tight, you can actually know those exact numbers. And there's, again, so many people who unfortunately out there maybe don't have their books as properly tracked as they should. So having a really good bookkeeper is honestly the foundation. And it's something that I push to a lot of young professionals, whether they're planners starting their own business or somebody opening up a wedding venue, like a lot of hopefully the listeners here, or somebody opening a photo business. So much of that is obviously focused first on just paying yourself, which is so important. But if you don't have the business side of things set up correctly, if you don't have your business insurance in line, if you don't have obviously your EIN and the obvious things, but if you also don't have professionals on board that you're paying to make sure your books are correct, your taxes are being paid correctly, your numbers are being tracked correctly, you will never be able to grow beyond that. You're going to always hit this time where you're going to realize, maybe taxes weren't paid correctly. Maybe you forgot to set aside money for things. And that's really when you're going to get, screwed is, I guess, the best word to use there, right? That's really where you're going to say, oh my gosh, what did I do? And so at a pretty young age, when I started, I was paying professionals for those things. And sometimes it hurts your heart because you're like, I'm making all this revenue and so much of it is, has to go to all these other things. But single-handedly, I could not have gotten to where I am now without having invested that money first. So I think that's something that I'm always really strong about pushing to people is get professionals on board, especially if you don't have a strong business background, then you need to hire the right people to make sure you're handling your business correctly.
That resonates so much, and it's hilarious. I was actually at a networking meeting, and I was talking to someone, and they were telling me, how they have like over a 70% profit margin, and I was like, whoa, that's like really good. Like, wow, that's wild. That's a really high profit margin. And then you come to talk a little bit more and realize they're doing almost everything. They're really not hiring out very many of the positions. And so, yeah, they're not, they're not correctly assigning value in the business to all of the hats that they're wearing. And I think for small business owners, it's really important. Like at any given point, you may be a partial bookkeeper, you might be the creative side, you might be some operations, you might be wearing these different hats. But when you consider your profit margin, you consider the amount of money that your company needs to make, you've got to allocate portions of that revenue that's coming in to those hats that you're wearing. And, truly, realistically, you might have closer to a 20% profit margin or a 15% profit margin if, once you hire in professionals, because essentially then it's kind of that quadrant, right? You've created a job for yourself. And so go ahead.
That was something I had to learn the hard way too, is we had a fairly high profit margin in my first several years of business. And as I brought on more talent, which we'll get to, and as I brought on not only just talent, but talent that I was paying more money to attract good talent, my profit margin was obviously going down. And my accountant and bookkeeper had to explain, like, this is okay. It's okay that it's dropping because you're still hitting these other numbers, but this is why it dropped so drastically last year. This was a couple of years ago. Last year, for instance, because you brought on, it was really mostly the staffing. And it was because I had started bringing on more talent to be able to support me. And then they helped me build more revenue. But of course, the margin gets smaller because they're getting so much more of the salary amounts too. So it is really important, again, to know these numbers and understand why that profit margin would drop and that it's okay to, and you're 100% right. You could be a very successful business with only a 25% profit margin or a 40% profit margin. And you could also be one, successful at a 75, but you're going to be doing everything yourself and you're going to be running yourself to the ground. So that's why it's so important to understand those numbers.
Totally. When you talk about business planning, when you're thinking about, what you actually want to do in your business, That's 100% fine. I think in the wedding industry, we have that ability to, we have creatives in our industry that are designing beautiful weddings. And if you want to do all of the things and wear all the hats, that's 100% fine. But the second that you start kind of pivoting your target and you're wanting to grow, your business infrastructure so that you don't always have to be involved as the business owner, which I know, a lot of our listeners and, the venue owners that are on this show, I know that's maybe the plan, like that succession planning, right? How are you doing that and just making sure that you're correctly allocating funds? You talked about bringing on team members. Could you share with me some of the first experiences you had in bringing on team members, and maybe add to that, if you would go back, maybe some things that you would do differently now that you're a little bit more experienced in business?
Yeah, great question. I think my mentality has always from the start been, when you find good talent, keep them, pay them well, and do everything you can to keep them. So, while some companies, might post job postings, I found that most of my best employees have come kind of through my network and just people that I've known and people that I've connected with that I say, oh my gosh, I have to have you. And they weren't looking for a job at the time. They weren't ready to leave their job. They weren't really necessarily even thinking they wanted to work with me, but they were just people that I saw and said, like, I need to work with you and I have to have you. And so I think that's a big thing is, you can post this fancy job description of all these skills you want this person to have and all the background you want them to have. Again, going back to our discussion of in the wedding world, do they have to have experience? Do they have to not? I would say all of my best hires had very little experience in the wedding world at all before they started working for me. And it was really more about, do they have the general type of skill set and do they have the personality that I need on my team and the type of work ethic and work quality that I need? And really what they did mattered so much less in the end. So that's one thing I would say too, is when you're, if you're a venue looking for new people or a small business in general, is to just be aware of how specific you're getting in that job listing, especially if it is more for a more entry-level role where that, again, matters even less. Of course, if you're a venue and you're trying to hire a director of catering, you do need them to have more background and experience. So this is a little bit of an open-ended question. But for some of those mid-level roles, there's so much that can be trained, and there's so much that's so specific to every business anyway that you're going to be training people your systems and processes regardless, right? So I think that's like always my first point is to really focus on that. But most of my team members came through people I know. One was a past bride. One was just a wedding day assistant with us that I said, oh my gosh, she's so good. We need to have her on the team. And I think it's really meeting people where they are and figuring out like, what do they need to work with you? What do you need to work with them? And finding that nice middle ground. And that it's not always going to happen where you have this perfect position ready for someone and they're ready to move. It's really more of a conversations. And that's what I see for most of my other small business owners is it's not, oh, I had a job opening, I listed it and I got this person and they magically started right away and it all lined up. Of course, that's how most corporate jobs work. In small business, it's a little bit different where typically, you start feeling this need of, I have too much on my plate. I need to start outsourcing more things. I need to bring somebody on. And I don't really know who that is yet. And then sometimes magically it just happens where you meet someone and go, wait, they're, the type of person I want. And maybe I'm scared because I don't think I can afford them yet. But then again, that's why it's so important to go back and know your books. And I had times where I wasn't planning on hiring, but I would go back to my bookkeeper and accountant and say, I don't know, there's this person that I just feel like I need and they can do all the things I want them to do. How can I afford them? And if that means you're taking a little bit off your top line for a little bit, you're making an investment in somebody, that is sometimes what has to happen too. And that will, outweigh itself twofold in the end. So it's really for me about spotting that talent and spotting the people that you want to have with you and that you want to have along for this journey. I assume like a lot of people listening, most of us in the small business world are like, at least under that 10% employee, a lot of us even under 5. And, you know better than I that team works really, really closely together when you're a really, really small team. And so it is most important that the personalities match, that the skill sets are, work well together and everyone kind of has their niche. So I think that's like my overarching, view of how I found staff in the past and how I approach it. And really just, when you find good people, to me, it's about keeping them happy. I think, my team has all been with me for a really long time. And I like to think that's for good reason that I've, kept them happy and made them feel invested. And they're really more than just employees. They're faces of the business. They're part of the business. And I know we'll get to this when we talk to networking, but it's not just, oh, that they work for me. People in our community just know them as entirely part of our business and team now. And that's also really important. And to me, makes them feel more invested to give more their time and hard work and hours to this company because they're building it with me. They're not just working for me. So that's also really important too.
It sounds like they have a sense of ownership in a way over, maybe not the company, but their role in the company in executing those events. Caitlin, I'm curious, you've gone through this, change in business with a rebrand. You're obviously targeting different clients than maybe you targeted 5, 6, 7 years ago. And so now as you do that, maybe a little something different is required, right? Different processes have changed. Maybe you've added in systems that you didn't have before because you've got more experience. There are things that have evolved in the business. When you have members of your team that maybe were incredible at that stage that you were at 5 years ago, 6 years ago, now you're making those changes. How do you handle some of those maybe even difficult discussions that have to happen that, where you say, hey, we're going to be using this system, or hey, before where you didn't have to do this, now we need to do this because we're going in this direction. And that not only because maybe you're starting to serve new clientele, but also your business is growing. You're not just focused on that the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania market. You're looking to be more of a nationally known brand. How do you have some of those conversations?
Yeah, and they can definitely be hard ones. So, it is something where I think this comes down to, bringing on a team who hopefully in the end shares the same vision as you. And when we were going through discussing this rebrand and making these bigger changes, I actually sat down with the current team that I had and really started talking to them about the vision I saw, where I wanted to take the company, where I wanted to go with it, and had real conversations with them about, do they share that same vision or do they not? And if they didn't, what vision did they see for the business and what role would they play in that? And so there was times when, when we had our original brand, was I going to keep that brand as a local brand and start the Fulton brand as a national brand? And if so, would my current right-hand person lead that in the Philly market, or would she want to come with me and do that? So we had all those conversations. Again, so important to bring your team into this conversation. At the end of the day, if you're an owner of a company, you are the owner and you have the right to say, this is just what we're doing and, come along or not. But if you have a really invested team, it's so important that they understand from the ground up why you're doing things and why you're passionate about making those changes and have them involved in that conversation. So we had a lot of conversations about their goals. Where did they want to go? Were they up for traveling? How much money do they want to make in the future? How many hours are they actually willing to work to make that amount of money? So very, very honest, raw conversations. And in the past, we had employees that were really great and maybe had skill sets that were valuable, like you said, in that moment of time. But I had an employee where, we described it as like the rest of my team was on this train and it was going 100 miles an hour this way. And she was like walking behind us. And we loved her dearly, but it was just the fact of, we see this vision and you're just not aligned anymore. And it's probably not the best fit. So you have to have some of those hard conversations. And I think that is something that the earlier you can catch that and understand like your team sharing that same vision is going to help, dictate whether that team's going to come with you and invest and put in those hours, or if they're going to kind of, step to the side and not be able to give you what you're looking for in that moment too. So it is really important to have those candid conversations.
Caitlin, I want to kind of wrap everything together that I just heard you say, make sure I got it, and maybe summarize a little bit for the audience. It seems like, number one, having your books in order so that you know how much you can afford to pay someone, right? That's that foundation. Literally your bottom line. And then the next step is, it sounds like being well networked in your market, because that's how you're attracting like-minded talent. Talent that shares your not only vision for the future, but your maybe your appreciation of the style of business that you run, right? So then there's that layer. Have your bottom line, have your P&L in good shape so that you understand how much you can afford to bring someone on. And then number two, be well networked. And then number three, make sure that you're having those vision conversations, those kind of like future mission, vision, value type conversations with your team so that they understand the direction that they're going, so it doesn't hit them by surprise. Would those three things kind of in a very general sense summarize how you would recommend building a team?
Absolutely. And I think that's, you mentioned it a little bit, but to kind of give one more piece to that is that when you're a small business, you can just have employees of your company, but we joke this all the time where my team's like, we drank the Kool-Aid, like we're just in, right? We drank the Kool-Aid, we're in this business. And so you really want them to be not only working for you, but they're brand ambassadors for you. They're the face of your company just as much as you are, and they need to be in it and they need to live and breathe it as much as you, and they need to speak the same lingo as you, and they need to be on the same page. And I think from that, the biggest compliment I ever get from other vendors when they learn our team, meet our team and get to know them, or some that have known them for the years that they've been on our team, they'll just say like, of course you're all a little different, but you all share this. Like, I know when any of you are there, it's going to be the same product, the same field, the same type of, like, they get the same thing out of us. And it's because we're all so well connected with how we run things and present the same way that I feel so good when I send them off to do things, because I know they're representing the company well, and they would always support the company and back it up and be, representing us to the best. So that is what you want to, that foundation helps build that. And that helps support your brand in the market, where people are going to be saying great things about your team and the people you have on board. And it's because of the foundation you build with them from the beginning. So it all comes full circle when you think of it that way.
Caitlin, what kind of accountability are you requiring from your team? Are there, as your team's grown, are there metrics that you're tracking, or are there certain data points, or maybe even a tool that you're using to help understand how productive your team is being?
Yeah, that's such a hard question, but a good one too. I think I've always found too that, and this might not work for everyone, but with me being a wedding planning company, but with a lot of people like photographers or, makeup artists or anyone who's in this industry, and even with venue people, they obviously work it the same way, that the wedding world, sometimes is a little bit of a commission-based world, because so much of the workload on you is being added last minute, or more projects are being added. And so it's hard to quantify salaries by just saying, here's your salary, here's the workload, that's what you do, and that's it. And so we follow a similar model where my girls have set salaries based on ongoing things they do, but a lot of their salary is also based on additional events we take on. And they have then, these goals that if we take on a larger event, they know they're getting compensated extra for that event. And the extra time and effort they put in, they know that's going to come back to them twofold. So that their salary is a little bit flexible in that sense. And then we also do some profit sharing at the end of the year, which again kind of gives them the benefit of just the more work you put in general throughout the year that's not been so specifically outlined, but the more we see you step up and just do things without asking for little bit of money along the way is all going to kind of come back to you twofold in the end, because you're invested in putting time and effort into this business to have our revenue grow for them to see some of that return later. So I think that has helped us build. So that's like the main metrics we follow. I've just always found that with my team specifically, like, I guess maybe this is so simple, but my whole model is of metric tracking is just like, they have certain things that are assigned to them. If they don't get done, I'm coming back to them and saying why, right? And so I've just built sort of this trust of do the job. I don't care the amount of hours you work, when you work, where you work, how you work. It's just, is the job done, or is it done well, or is it not? And if it's not, that's when obviously conversations happen. But luckily, I don't have to have very many of those. So that's how we structure it. Yeah.
That's huge. And that goes back to, building that team and keeping that team, staying in touch with that team over the time. Just for context, and maybe I should have asked you this before, how many team members do you currently have?
Yeah, so we have 5 total team members, including myself, that are like full or part-time. So 3 of us are full-time, 2 are part-time, and then I have about 10 to 12 assistants that are just 1099 freelancers that work with us on wedding days too. So for our full-time team, they're actually W-2 employees. They have healthcare matches, they have retirement matches, so they are full employees of Fulton Events. Our part-time team members are actually also on W-2, but their hours are just a little bit more limited, which means their salary is more competitive to a part-time salary, but they're still fully in our systems, getting taxes taken out, and are able to obviously have it as a typical W-2 job.
Got it. That's awesome. I think initially struggled with bringing on full-time people, or even part-time people that I was wanting to be able to say, hey, this is how many hours you're going to be working, because of the often dynamic and flexible nature of our industry, right? You've got wedding season, you've got engagement season, you've got some of these seasonality fluctuations. How do you handle that internally with your team? And then kind of in the same line of conversation that we've been having, how do you explain that to maybe a potential new hire who's interested, how many hours am I going to be working?
Yeah, I know. And it is a tough one. And obviously, it's so dependent on industry. So I can only speak a little bit more on my own. I also have learned that obviously, a lot of people pay, per hour, right? Which is a very standard thing in this industry to say, okay, you're working 6 hours a week or 10 hours a week or 15 hours a week and you're getting this amount of money. What I've always found to be beneficial to me, and some people may disagree with this, is that what I do instead is I base their pay based on projects they're overseeing and things they're responsible for. And I've determined about how many hours a week I think those things should take, but they do not track or report any kind of hours. So I've always found like if you are somebody that's efficient and you can get it done faster, good for you, right? And because you're going to get it done faster and move along to something else. If you're someone who takes longer to do something, then that's also on you because this is what I've deemed as the typical amount of hours it should take someone to do that job. So I've handled it a little differently. I felt like that's been easier on us. It's allowed my team to just sort of say, hey, this is about how many hours I'm going to work and I'm going to decide exactly how long things are going to take me and when I'm going to prioritize or not prioritize versus having to say, okay, I finished this week and submitting, say, the 10 hours that they worked or tracking every little hour. I think it also gives people a little more autonomy where they're invested in a project and they just want to get it done and they're less tracking like exactly how many hours it took them to do that. And instead they're focused on completing the project well. So that method has worked for me. It might not work for everyone. But then what we do for our team is because it's seasonal for our planners, and this might be the same for, say, photographers or videographers or certain people. A lot of my photographers' friends will say, oh, if I hire, an associate shooter or something, they don't get paid until like that wedding happens. So like you mentioned, they might be really heavily paid during wedding season and then really underpaid other times of the year. What we do is a portion of my team's pay is based on how many weddings they're at, but it's calculated at the beginning of the year and then it's totaled and divided by 12. So they're equally paid throughout the year. So they have consistent money coming in and it's treated more, again, like a W-2 full-time job where they're getting paid throughout the year more equally. And then once that's established, when more work comes in up and beyond that, they do get essentially commissions or bonuses throughout the year, but it gives them more comfort knowing that they have a salary that's distributed equally and it's treated more like a full-time job than it would be if it was just kind of that project work that's here or there. So that's how I've chosen to handle it. And I think they appreciate that too.
Totally. Well, it's cool for the business as well because, instead of it being kind of that feast or famine type thing where, for cash flow purposes, it's really heavy sometimes and it's really light other times. Now you're kind of spreading it out a little bit more evenly. So I can imagine your team appreciates that as well.
Lots of tracking to make that happen, but it is worth it in the end. It keeps everyone happy.
Are there any tools that you're using to track that maybe if someone's listening to this right now and they're like, gosh, it's a lot, maybe they're not able to track with the current system that they're using? Are there any tools?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I would like to pretend we have some fancy system, but we honestly use like an Excel sheet that determines like how much people are getting paid and what way. And then each planner has like what we call their salary builder, where they know their starting salary and they're able to throughout the year, if they want to add certain numbers in to see what their totals will be. And then we do obviously have a payroll system that we use that actually pays out our payroll, but to physically make that structure of like how much are they making, we honestly just use an Excel spreadsheet, which is kind of the easiest form, but it has worked. So if anyone wants to see templates of that, they're welcome to reach out to me and happy to share that, how that works too.
Cool. And it's free. I mean, a lot of the dashboards and things that you can buy is like pretty expensive. So that's huge. That's awesome. Caitlin, listening to you talk, listening to you share how you build your team, how you help them grow, help your business grow, how you've kind of rebranded, that takes a fair amount of courage. It takes tons of leadership, right? How do you pour back into yourself and grow as a leader so that you're able to make these decisions and help grow your team and lead them in the direction that, you're setting?
Yeah, great question too. I think this probably does lead to our next topic, which does circle a little bit around networking. And I think, as small business owners, you can get stuck in your ways. You can have your head in the work that you're already doing or in your local market or whatever it might be. And, I always had dreams of making the company go bigger, but it wasn't until I started getting out of my local market and meeting other people across the country and at larger scale networking events that I really understood how I could do that, how attainable it actually was, and whether or not I felt like I had the skill set to do that. So I think that's one thing too, is that, you hear me saying, invest in your team, keep them happy, pay them well. But you also, like you just mentioned, have to invest in yourself and have to invest in your own education and networking opportunities to give you the information that you need to be able to be a good leader and to be able to see the vision for the company. So I had a successful business when it was under other brand. I was, pretty much known as a top planner in my market, but to get to that next level, I understood it a little bit, but I didn't quite have the resources to fully, be able to see it so clearly. And I also didn't have my vision that aligned. So I knew I wanted something more. I knew I wanted something bigger, but I needed help figuring that out. And so it wasn't until I started going to larger networking events like Engage, went to, just even some local WIPA events and went to an emergence event and started going to different conferences and meeting different people and connecting with companies that did have a more national brand presence, that I sort of saw the vision of, I know this is something that I want. And from my friends that I met at all these amazing events, got more context on how did they make it happen? What did they do? What kind of changes did they make? And was able to then take all of that and really flesh out my vision for where I wanted to take the brand. And that led to the decision to do a complete rebrand and sort of reposition ourselves in the market. So, at the time, my team's so supportive, but it's like they could have looked at it like, oh, she gets to go to all these fancy things and she gets to, go to all these fun events. But of course, these networking events are, I'm not going to lie, they're a lot of fun, right? If you're a social person, it's really enjoyable. But they were so important for me to really guide the business in the brand direction and to be able to come back to them and say, okay, I've learned all this information and now I'm bringing it back to you. And now I have a more clear sense of where I want to take the business to brand. So don't feel guilty investing in yourself. Don't feel guilty, as an owner, obviously, especially it's your business and you need to invest, time in networking, education, fostering relationships. And so we worked with, went to some networking events. I worked with some consultants for pieces of the rebrand and the new business direction. So there was a lot of investment that went into that to get myself more clear on where we wanted to go. And then I had to come back with all that though. And like I mentioned earlier, sort of pitch that new direction to my team and get them on board and have them understand why I wanted to go this way and, what the whole backstory was, and then understand if they were on that train too and if they saw that same direction as me. And luckily they did. And now that we're kind of through that, now it's the point where they're starting to come to networking events with me. I'm starting to invest in them going to these other networking opportunities and conferences that they can really even understand it more clearly. So I guess I'm just a proponent of investing in, networking opportunities, consulting, conferences, all of that to be able to see the bigger picture.
Absolutely. Caitlin, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but I want to ask you a specific question. You said if you're a social person, go to the events, they're fun, right? But specifically, if you aren't a social person by nature, why are networking events so important? And maybe what are some goal setting, what are some goals that you can set for yourself if you aren't a social person at networking events to help you get the most value out of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've had this conversation with a lot of friends because as I've started to go with some networking events, some people in my own local market are saying like, wow, I've always been interested in that, but I'm not as social as you. Like, how would I handle that? And so one simple tip that sounds, so simple, but is probably helpful is, some of those friends have come along with me to those things. And if you have a friend who's, going to networking opportunities, or you can get them to go with you and they are a little bit more social, having sort of a buddy system of someone you can go with that is always going to like keep an eye on you, bring you into the conversation. And I think, as my responsibility as a social person, I always find that I'm the one in events saying, oh, by the way, this is my friend Jonathan. He's a podcast and he's done this. And I sort of speak for them to start it, and they'll kind of get a little shy for a moment, but then it starts the conversation. So I always think that's my responsibility as someone who's a little more social to make sure I'm starting the conversation for my friends who maybe are a little bit more intimidated by that. But, I think at a lot of these conferences and events, there are lots of different people there, and you will see people that, that is a little bit more intimidating, but they're such welcoming environments. I mean, the wedding world, I think, as you know, too, is just one that is just unmatched to any other, where truthfully, like, people want to see others succeed. People get excited about people, each other's businesses. They want to see people do well. And it's, in my opinion, it's not a very clicky world. It's a world where people are excited to hear what you're doing and want to know. And so, of course, if you're a little more antisocial, you might have to prep yourself a little bit more on topics you might, be able to bring up and conversations like that. But I've just found even my friends are a little less social have still thrived in this world. And it's probably because so many of us in this world are more social and we just kind of bring them in and don't let them leave. So I would tell people not to be intimidated to try to go.
So find yourself a Caitlin is what you're saying.
Yeah, find yourself a Caitlin and they will bring you a lot with them.
I love that. And I think that's a really good point. You said your experience has been that the wedding industry hasn't been very clicky. And I think I'm curious, if someone's listening to this right now and they disagree with that, I'd love to, see that in the comments or kind of get some feedback.
Yeah.
To share
thoughts on that.
Yeah.
So I guess it could appear clicky. What I think I want to make clear and say is that, a lot of times people even say, oh, planners, they just hire all their friends to do their weddings, or, oh, venues just always, just recommend the same people. It's not that no one else is welcome at that. It's typically because those people have put in the time and hours to make a relationship with them. So if you're someone at home who isn't going to networking events, who isn't meeting people out and about, who isn't putting time into a relationship, it could feel like clicky in the sense that, well, why am I not on that list? Or why does that planner never work with me? But it's because those other vendors have put in time for us to build an actual personal relationship. And of course, we really try, especially for our clients, that, we don't get kickbacks recommending anybody, nothing like that. But of course, a vendor that we see more often at events or talk to more often, who reaches out to me, is going to be more top of mind than one who's never reached out to me at all, right? So it's not that as a planner, I say, oh, you can't work with me unless this. We really are open to anyone. But of course, the more effort you put into connecting with a planner or a venue, the more you're going to get back. So I think that's how I would describe it, where people could see it a little bit like that. But it's because people that might feel more clicky, we're seeing each other, we're investing in ourselves and our businesses, and we're going to the same events. We're seeing each other at the same events. And it's because we're paying to be there. And it's not, I also hate when people say like, oh, it's a pay to play. But part of it is that we're investing in our businesses. And if I see Jonathan at an event because you've invested to be there, I also want to know why you've invested to be there and what you're wanting to do, because you're clearly taking it more seriously than someone who's sitting at home. So I think that's how I would describe it, maybe, is that it, when you're in these roles and you're going to these events, it helps connect you with others who are also investing in their businesses, and are typically people investing in their business are people who are also wanting to make changes or growth or have more impact. So you then tend to join together and say, how can we do this together? So that's how I guess I would describe.
Caitlin, I feel like that's really insightful. And I feel like, I hope people hear that and really take it to heart and invest in themselves, in their businesses. I do think that there have been times that folks have gone to networking events, mixers, things like that, and felt like it was a waste of time. And so the question I have for you is, how do you determine if something that, a networking opportunity, for example, is a good opportunity, or potentially just more like a social club that really you're not getting that much value from?
Good question. I also think it takes research, right? So before I go to any of these, I like to understand, where is it? Who's going to be there? If you can get like an attendee list in advance, and be strategic, right? It's okay. Obviously I like to think I'm a kind person who will be nice to everybody, but it's also okay to understand like who are people that I'm going to actually work with, who are people that even if I'm not going to work with, we might just connect and find value in each other too. So that's really something that's important too. I'll step back for a second and say that I have a lot of vendor friends where candidly, we're never going to work together on a wedding, ever. We're not the same style. We're not in the same market. We're not at the same price point, but I may have noticed in them that they're a really good business person, and I want to talk business with them and we get along about that. I may realize that we just share the same hobbies. We're both skiers and they live in Colorado and we should ski together when I'm out there doing a wedding. Or I might find that they built a really amazing team and that's something I'm really passionate about and we can talk about that. But I might never work with them on a wedding. So the thing that is also really important is to understand that everyone has value to you. Everyone has value in different ways. And it might not be that you're going to work with them or they're going to recommend you, but there are people like me, candidly, who are also just connectors. So if I meet somebody and I think, probably not the right fit for me, I still want to know, what do they do? Where do they do it? How much do they charge? What are they excited about? Where do they want to take their business? And then I'm talking about them to other people. So they might never get a job directly from me and be on a Fulton wedding, but they're going to get a job from my friend who's the perfect fit for them. So just remember that everyone is valuable in networking, no matter what level that they're at, no matter where they are. And I think what I found in going to some of these higher level events is I was really scared too. I'm just, a planner in my local market, and I wasn't at the time as much on the national scene. And how are these people going to take me, seriously? But, it's okay to be honest about where you are and where you want to go. And so I met some people who, were quote like higher up than me on that totem pole of the budget weddings they do or how well known they are. But I would say candidly, this is where I am now, but this is where I want to go. And it's okay to be honest about that. And a lot of them would say, that's awesome. Like, I hope that in 3 years, we're doing a wedding together that's at this budget level and you're doing that wedding, and whatever I can do to help you get there, whatever advice I can give you, feel free to ask me. So don't feel intimidated. I think a lot of people are much more happy to talk about their businesses. And, when you really think about the wedding world specifically, majority of people I know grew their businesses from scratch too. So we all did this, and we were all at each level at a certain point. And so when you see somebody that's, quote unquote, higher up than you, don't be afraid to talk with them, and don't be afraid to ask them those questions and say, hey, I really just want to know what you did and what was your best advice to get to that point too. So I don't know if that exactly answered your question. I maybe missed something there, but.
No, it totally does. And, it reminds me of something that a mentor told me a while back, is just to be more interested rather than interesting. If you come into it with a mindset of, hey, this is what I know, this is the business that I've built, versus some of the questions that you were asking, right? Like, how have you done it? What have you done? What is your angle on this market? How much do you charge? What's your journey then? All of a sudden you're being interested in them, and now they feel heard, like, it's active listening 100%. And then it's that connection piece. And you can only really do those referrals, like you were saying, if you're asking the right questions. So I love that. That's really good advice. I want to wrap today by asking a question. I typically ask it of our venue owners, and I'm curious for you, of the various hats that you're wearing in your business, what things are your favorite pieces of the business? When you get to do those things, it just lights you up, and it's the best for you.
It's a great question. I feel like I already said so many of these, so you made my job easy. But I think because of my marketing and advertising background before, going through the rebrand was something I loved and was really passionate about and really was excited about. So that side of things really excites me. The brand direction, the types of weddings we're doing, the creative direction for those weddings, that is something that really, really fuels me quite a bit. And I'm very fueled by networking, mentorship, and education. So obviously, I myself go to a lot of networking events, but we recently launched a WIPA chapter just last week in Philadelphia. So that's a big thing that I'm spearheading. And I also mentor and do education for other wedding planners. So that is something that I'm passionate about, I think, just because, again, of where I started and how I had to grow and learn everything myself and started at a fairly young age, that, when I see young talent, I want to help them get to that same place too. So while I love my clients, I also love designing the weddings. The design is the side that I really handle, and my team handles a lot of the planning logistics. So I would say the creative direction, the brand direction, the design of the weddings, and just the networking and education piece are the pieces that fuel me most.
That's so cool. Well, Caitlin, thanks so much for coming on the show today. It's been really fun getting to know you a bit more and hearing about your business. For anyone who's just listening to this on the podcast side of it instead of the YouTube, where can people connect with you more if they're interested in reaching out?
Yeah, of course. So you can follow us on Instagram at Fulton Events, Fulton Events. You can also check out our website, fultonevents.com. Those are probably the two best places to connect. And we do have just a general email, hello@fultonevents.com. So if you have any questions on anything I said today and you want to connect, I'm definitely not shy and love connecting with people. So don't hesitate to email me, and I'm happy to set up a time to chat.
Beautiful. Thanks so much for coming on the show today. This was awesome.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Jonathan. I appreciate it, and look forward to listening along to more of your podcast soon.
Thanks.